Well, I was quoting a guy called Bertrand Chameroy, actually, who's a sort of commentator, and he had this wonderful phrases to explain the kind of cliches. He said, Parisians are layabouts, alcoholics, chain smokers, disagreeable and lecherous, and they all live in a wonderful theme park. All men are pick-up artists, all Parisians have extramarital affairs, all shopkeepers are unpleasant, and all the French have names that make you want to wear a beret and carry a baguette under your arm. Those are the kind of cliches that are put out there. And I heroically watched all 10 episodes in one night in order to write my story. So, yes, I briefly became the television critic.
How did you feel after 10 episodes?
Well, at the beginning, when I watched the first one, I thought, that's it, I can't watch anymore. It's too absurd and it's too, meaningless and light. But when I had to watch the next 9, I thought, well, it's okay. And what really surprised me was that the Parisians themselves are not actually angry about these vaguely absurd stereotypes. They actually find it quite a nice form, many of them anyway, find it quite a nice form of light relief from having to worry about COVID and having to worry about curfews and lockdowns. So in fact, people were more kind of welcoming than I expected of the series in Paris.
More welcoming. And we mentioned the beret wearing. For instance, the magazine Grazia, in an article entitled, "Is Emily in Paris Actually That Bad?" Displays the lead character wearing, in this instance, a kind of a purple beret. What we have found, Dave Clark, is that the city of Paris and the tourism board does little to dispel stereotypes. Hey, there's no such thing as bad publicity, right?
Well, there's another movie about Paris that's coming out now. They've remastered in 4K Maciej Katowice's film La Haine, and I do wonder whether Emily Paris will attract tourists than La Haine, which obviously tells a quite different story about life in the streets of Paris. One where has more in common with the anti-SARS protests, perhaps, and its tale of police brutality and people living on the edge of society. TV is often about escapism, and I'm sure there are a lot of cliches on French TV about America that Americans wouldn't recognize. And I think if the purpose of this show was to generate publicity for itself, then my Twitter timeline would suggest that a lot of my Parisian friends are watching it. They're not all watching it because they like it. Some of them are watching it so they can, they can tweet abuse about it. But they must have seen it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who say they hate it who are going to watch every episode.
Anna Nemtsova, have you watched Emily in Paris?
I have, in fact. I skipped through a few episodes, but I've got the idea. And I know Russian students who have watched it and discussed it. I think, as you know well, in Russia, Paris is definitely romanticized, and Russian elite go to France when they could go to France for vacation, and some have apartments there. Russian intellectuals obviously adore French culture, French museums, French art. With America, Russia has its own stereotypes about Americans. There are not too many Americans left in Russia. There may be only a dozen American journalists still accredited in Russia. But it seems that everybody knows what Americans like. My American friends complain that taxi drivers tell them what Americans like. But young people love America. They love Netflix. They like American music, and they dress up as American teenagers. So there are lots of bridges through culture, definitely. And there is a festival of American movies going on.
That's fascinating what you're saying. And Victor Mallet, this kind of answers a bit the point about why the French like it. And I'll put it to you, Rosie Collier, which is maybe this series, even though it's set in Paris, says more about Americans than it does about the French.
Netflix expansion, right, across the world. And it just earlier this year has opened Netflix Niger, which means Netflix Nigeria, and this kind of localization of their outfit. But at the same time, quite dependent on perhaps more positive stereotypes of a given place. And I know that the films that they've selected from Nigeria, they're not their sort of typical sort of blood-letting kind of Nollywood films that make Lagos look good, and Nigerians look quite good. So I think it just plays into that as part of Netflix global strategy, I guess.
And to be fair, it's just as cliched about Americans. I mean, Emily is the classic cliche. She's naive. She comes from Chicago. Her boyfriend doesn't even have a passport until she moves to Paris. A lot of the cliches are about the Americans as well. So Darren Star's quite even-handed, and when he did Sex and the City about New York, that wasn't the real New York either. I mean, any more than this is the real Paris. It's certainly not gritty. That's the one thing you can say about this series.